Hello and welcome to Swallowing Paper. This is one of those videos I may never make second parts for, not because I dislike dwelling in negativity, but because I just haven't read many books that I think performed as poorly as these did. Indeed, it's primarily because I do my best to avoid terrible literature, and while the state of being terrible is subjective, every book I'll delve into within this video will be accompanied with explanations expressing my disliking of them. Which just means I'll tell you why they suck, but don't let my videos stop you from reading them. Maybe there will be something for you in experiencing a poorly written novel. After all, they're the best examples of what not to do with your writing, if you're a writer yourself. So at least they succeed in some regard, but of course it's a glass half full, glass half empty situation. Before we begin, I'd like to offer my condolences to anyone who has found a liking to any of the novels in this video. I'm praying for you. Jokes aside, like whatever you want, I'm nothing. The way I'll structure this video is simple. I'll begin with the least offensive text, the one which abuses my sensibilities the least, and I'll work my way up so that by the end of this video we'll be left with the worst of the worst, the shit of the crop, whatever's left on top. For Ground Zero, we have Ara by Carlos Fuentes, a beloved novel written entirely in the second person about a young historian in Mexico City by the name of Felipe Montero, who finds an advertisement in the paper whose every requirement appears to be tailored to his being, and he thinks on it, on how many other people just like him have read the advertisement and perhaps have already secured themselves the position, and thus he thinks it best not to think about it. The very next day, he remembers in the morning when he returns to the diner he read the paper in, turning to the advertisement section, and he thinks about his thinking on it, and he thinks on it, thinks rather hard, and he thinks it wouldn't hurt to go at this point. After all, the advertisement was printed into paper again, which means they're still searching, he thinks, and he goes, thinking about the street the house is on, for he thought that no one lived there, but you could only assume that he's thought wrong. By the look of it, there's nothing wrong with the book, it's practically a perfect story, but where it falters isn't the fault of the authors but of the translators, a guy by the name of Lysander Kemp, responsible for translating the bulk of Octavio Paz's material. Luckily for me, I own a bilingual copy, so I was able to check the translation with the original text, and what I found was that Lysander was switching out words, cutting the original phrasing, rendering sentences terse, and refusing to preserve the formatting present in the original text, which, by a fault, altered the story in ways which the author hadn't intended. But what keeps this book from deviating any further down the list is that, to my knowledge, no major events in the story were changed. The translation just sucks. And even if you don't know what things were switched out, the prose is clunky and is, at times, grammatically incorrect in comparison to the original Spanish, with an example being a moment in the opening of the book in which Lysander fuses two Spanish sentences and creates an instance of awkward parataxis, which just means he smushed everything together for convenience. All in all, I liked the book, but the prose was ugly in the mouth. And knowing that Lysander's translation is the English standard compelled me to raise a stink. For this next book, I'd like to nominate Red by Jack Ketchum for a slightly worse novel. Unfortunately, unlike Ara, this book is bad because Jack actually wrote it this way. It begins with a sexagenarian by the name of Avery Ludlow who, while fishing, has his dog brutally slaughtered in front of him after some asses try robbing him for money he didn't have. Let's just say it's proto-John Wick. He tracks the kids down in hopes of killing them, discovers that one of them has a rich dad who practically owns the town, kind of like that my dad works at Microsoft type of shit. And long story short, for some reason, 60-year-old Avery goes on a tangent and falls in love with a significantly younger reporter who finds him repulsive but irresistible. She's the amalgamation of every female trope in novels written by men. Why this book sucks is simple. It reeks of Richard Lehman disease, it's unrealistic, reads like an old American man's action-packed wet dream, and it's too predictable, which leads me to assume that Jack just needed some extra cash, and I can't blame him. But what keeps it from dipping any further is the fact that Jack Ketchum isn't a bad writer on the prosaic level. As bad as the plot is, it absorbs you, kind of like eating really greasy food. And by the end of the book, you shrug it off but can't help but feel like a movie's in your head. Our next contestant is Point Omega by Don DeLillo. In his bibliography, Point Omega is but a 100-page long hiccup next to books like Underworld or Libra, maybe even Falling Man, shriveling like the room just got cold. And I could only imagine that many of his readers disregard it as an instance of really good writer pump slop at the end of their career. Point Omega is concerned with the septuagenarian and a filmmaker who wants to record him in one take. Just a man against a wall, as written in the book, and to be frank, the purported film this character wants to make is much more interesting than the actual novel. And why did this filmmaker want to record this old guy? Well, because this old guy was in Iraq out of all places. And while I find that to be a good plot for a book, considering I'm a huge film snob and films and directors are mentioned every other page, like all cool guys in media, old man Richard is insanely resistant. He's a recluse living in the same house as Courage the Cowardly Dog, and for reasons unbeknownst to us, the old guy's grown-ass daughter disappears shortly after the filmmaker longs for her at first glance. Point Omega stuffed with superficial meditations on time, the feels though Don DeLillo just had his Andrei Tarkovsky cherry popped. And due to DeLillo's really exacting style, it reads as though he believes he just said the most mind-blowing shit, but overall it's an unrequited shock. Last and extraordinarily least, if you'd like, you could click off the video. If not, then you'd have to know Live, Live, Live by Jonathan Buckley. And don't worry, he's not the singer. He's just one of the few people who were on the long list for the Booker Prize of 2025. And maybe his recent books are good, but the day I finally finished Live, 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 I tore a new asshole in my review for it on Goodreads. And it isn't because I'm demented, but because it posed as a high hope. I really thought it'd become my favorite novel of the year, but no, things don't always pan out that way. It's one of those books that are perfect in concept but poor in execution. It contains fragments of non-fiction, primarily things of the Aleister Crowley Singaporean ghost footage speculation on the afterlife sort of thing. The really disturbing feeling you get looking Wittgenstein in the eye but can't explain why kind of thing. But the book does nothing with that material, it simply name drops it for cool points, using it to breach the word count because the actual plot isn't interesting enough. While the prose was nice, at times, if we ignore the terrible similes, Live, Live, Live devolves into the writer reaching into his foreskin with metaphors to impress you with, as he exhibits the tendency to explain every sentence right after you read it, which gives the impression that he either didn't believe in himself or that he didn't believe his readers were intelligent enough to parse through the puddle he throws them in. While DeLillo does similar in Point Omega, what's different is that Buckley overwrites it, not to mention that the narrator in Live, Live, Live sucks up to an old man throughout the entire text, whereas DeLillo's book feels like someone as socially inept as I am is deciding to play show and tell with you, like an old dog showing you a new trick it learned. By the way, there's a moment in the book which Buckley calls a simile a metaphor, but I don't remember what page that's on. Anyway, I'll leave you off with 3 quotes from Live, Live, Live. Bereavement is a perpetual earthquake, Lucas had said Aaron. The aftershocks go on, becoming weaker but never ceasing, page 220. His repertoire of similes and metaphors was extensive. They were presented to me like jewels on cushions. Words pass through these mysteries like bullets through fog, he told me. When I try to explain these things, I misrepresent them, necessarily. They require a language that none of us could speak, or this is like trying to draw a diagram of the universe, or I am not transposing these ideas into words. The ideas are the creation of words. The truth lies above the words, outside them. We are slaves to words and the reason that proceeds from them, he said. Page 87. Her sister watched her walk out of the room as one might watch a person who is washing her hands for the 10th time in a single hour. I lost a page number. Alright, bye.